Today we have the privilege of sitting down with Eric Jeng. Based in New York City, Eric rose to prominence over the last couple of years as a content creator and storyteller. His videos are so compelling that they have now been viewed nearly 300 million times. As of this filming, he now has over 800,000 followers across platforms. His man-on-the-street style interviews feature people from all different walks of life. Garbage men and OnlyFans models, the homeless and the rich, black and white, progressives and conservatives, old and young. In a society that has become increasingly judgmental of one another, Eric's work is a breath of fresh air. As a master storyteller, he has shown us how there is far more that unites us than divides us. In this episode, we talk about how Eric's work has changed the way he sees people. We discuss an important skill that we call benefit from, which is how to hold a conversation with someone you disagree with. We then get into cancel culture, spirituality, meaning, purpose, and work. We believe that after listening to this conversation, it might just change the way you view people too. So without further ado, Eric Jeng. Your platform has completely blown up over the past couple years. You've built really large followings across Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I was doing some of the math, and it seems like your videos have been viewed like 300 million times, which is just like, it's hard to like quantify that. It's like, it's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, why do you feel like what you're doing is like resonating with people so much?
People are looking for like real stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of content online that's trend based or focused on like shock value or just pure entertainment. And yeah, I think anytime you're able to just have like a real moment, like something about that, you'll just be scrolling and then you'll be like, what is this? Like I'll get comments sometimes, they're like, what is this? Why did this video like come into my algorithm? Like it's just kind of like different.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. And then, you know, I do take a little bit pride in my, you know, editing and storytelling and just stuff I've learned over the years. And then also just the people I meet have a lot of good and interesting stories.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I love the storytelling aspect. I think like the editing and stuff like that. And when you have the music behind it and just, yeah, I just feel like you've really just nailed it. And like as a kind of master storyteller, are you surprised that like it's blown up to the degree that it has?
I think if you were to tell myself that released the first video on YouTube 4 years ago, how things would look now, I would be surprised. But because it's been such a natural progression and things just kind of happens daily, weekly, I can't say I'm surprised because it's just like a steady progression. So it just has felt like a thing that I've been building.
What draws you to people in general?
I mean, it's that feeling you get when you're on a subway and you look around. I don't get this all the time, but sometimes I'm just sitting on a subway and I just look around. I'm just like, wow, everyone is so interesting. Like everyone's just a character, and you just get super curious about like, what is their world like? And then you begin to talk to them and you begin hearing their stories. And I think you begin realizing that you're very much, you can see yourself in their story. So someone who seemed like a stranger, you're like, oh, this guy's actually, perhaps the plot points of our story are different, but like the challenges, the obstacles, the emotions are the same.
Yeah, I think there's like such a uniting factor in disarming thing and hearing about someone's story. And when I watch your videos, it's like, I don't know, sometimes there's like this fascination that's on your face while you're listening to them. In particular, I remember watching one where you were like sitting on the street. It appeared that two guys were homeless, but like you were just sitting there listening to their story and just all different types of people, all different kind of walks of life, which I just find to be so interesting. Are there any videos like over the past few years that like you're like, wow, that really made a mark on me, or that experience really made a mark on me that just kind of stand out immediately to you?
I talked with a woman who lost her son in a shooting. This was a couple years ago. Her name was Frankie. And it's funny. It's like some of the most impactful videos or projects that I had come from like, so that day was like, I had set up my camera outside my stoop and like 20 people had gone by. Yeah. And everyone said no. Yeah. And usually after 20, at least one person will say yes. Yeah. But I don't know, something about that day, I was just super determined. I was like, you know what, I am not going home until I get someone to stop. And then finally, like on the 20th one, Frankie walks by and she's looking for a place to smoke her joint. And I was like, oh, you just smoke on my stoop. And she's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, I got a lot of pain in my heart, just to let you know. And I'm like, all right, let's cook, you know? And then she just got right into it. She had, at that point, her son had was shot and killed in July 2020 amidst like pandemic shutdowns. There was a bunch of random shootings at the time, and just senselessly shot and killed. And she had been still grappling with for a couple of years, and just listening to her struggle with guilt and anger, loss. I had an end of a 7-year relationship once that kind of felt like losing a loved one as well. And so obviously it's not the same thing as losing a son, but I could empathize a little bit. I can understand the shock, the unable to let go, the anger, the just where she was. And so I think that's what kind of allowed me to connect with her. But that was just like a real conversation, and that was in 2021. So like not too long after I started. And I remember after finishing that interview, which was the most emotional, deep, vulnerable, real, authentic, and kind of still is, interview that I had, that's when I was like, oh, okay, what I'm doing here is like more important than views and comments and likes. Yeah. Like there's suffering and evil in the world, and I just feel compelled to expose it, or to talk about it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, there's so much like meaning and that comes out through your work. And I just feel like there's so much of humanity that comes out of your work. You mentioned the thing about, 20 people passing by. And so obviously our culture today, like most people like hate rejection, really struggle with it. And so like, how did you build up like the tough skin to just like, okay, I just got rejected by like 20 people. I imagine like even someone who's like dating, I just got rejected by like 20 women in a row, and it's just kind of like just so deflating. And so like, does that get to you, and like, how do you frame that?
It does. It still does get to me. For someone to completely desensitize themselves to rejection, which I think is possible, you would lose a little bit of your humanity. Yeah. Like I'm a sensitive person. That's what helps me become a good interview or have good interviews. And so I don't want to lose, like, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm not going to afraid. Like, no, I do get kind of hurt from rejections, but there's different types of rejections. So if there's someone like they're in a rush and they got to go, that one doesn't hurt. The ones that hurt are the ones where you're just like super nice. You're, hey, excuse me. And they just like walk past you and you're like, oh, yeah, those are the painful ones. Part of how I've been able to work through that and not let like something like that like just derail me. When I first moved to the city, I had an end of the 7-year relationship, so I came to the city like looking for love, and something I got into was like talking to women on the street and trying to like get their numbers and trying to get to know them. So that gave me a lot of experience with rejection, with awkward interactions, with dealing with the discomfort of trying to open up a conversation interaction with a complete stranger. So, you do that for a couple of years. I didn't realize at the time, but that was kind of in a way preparing me for what I'm doing now.
When you're speaking about the Frankie video and the realization of wow, like how much this means, or like how powerful this is. One video that really kind of fit into that category for me was the eye staring contest one. And this has been something of like more of a cultural phenomenon in recent years. I don't know if you heard about, I forget what her name was, but she like set up a studio. I think it was at one of the museums, and she would just like stare into people's faces.
And her husband popped up or something. Yeah. Her ex-husband popped up.
Yeah. And that just like went viral, exploded, and like people would just watch her stare at people and like just the reactions. And so clearly I think something in the same vein kind of like struck a chord with people when it comes to like staring, because you like ask people to just stare into the camera, and like just people like staring into the camera like got 5 million views. And so what do you think it is about just like looking in someone's eyes that is so powerful without even using words?
Well, the eye is a special part of the body. It's like the only part of the body that's not covered by skin in a way or something. So it's kind of like your access into the inside. It's hard to stare into someone's eyes. It's at first when you do it, it's uncomfortable. But once you kind of stick with it and work through that discomfort, that's where the kind of magic happens and the vulnerability and the openness happens. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm interviewing a person, this is a little trick I do, like, and they're talking about something and they're kind of going on about something that isn't super relevant, but I'm just letting them kind of talk. Yeah. I'll like actually stop listening to what they're saying. And I just like look, like, I was just like stare into their souls. Yeah. So through their eyes. Yeah. And what I notice is I start to intuit certain things about them. Like I'm looking at their eyes, how quickly they move around as they talk, how often they blink. There's a sort of person behind the eyes that you kind of sense when you look into the eyes. I did this exercise once at a retreat where everyone just like looked into their eyes for a couple of minutes. Yeah. That's not something you do normally, but we just took turns doing it. And, you know, it's uncomfortable at first. But I remember after about 30 minutes of doing this, there's a point where I was just like, oh, snap. There's a whole other consciousness behind these eyes that like, it's just this, there's this the conscious, there's this, the spirit, there's this thing that's independent of how he looks, how she looks. It's just pure consciousness or whatever. I don't know, and that's just kind of cool. I don't know how that kind of helps with interviews or connecting with people, but it helps you get deeper.
Yeah, I don't have the most streamlined answer for it, but I feel like it has at some level has to do with like being seen. Yeah. By people, like truly being seen.
Would you be up for a little experiment?
Sure.
1 minute.
1 minute.
We'll stare into each other's eyes.
Yeah.
And tell me how we can share how we feel.
Yeah.
Afterwards. Okay. It's the longest minute of my life. But just from that, I'll share and then you can share what that was like for you.
Yeah.
There was a moment where I was just like, oh wow, this person I'm staring at has like, as a whole, like has probably gone through a lot of pain and suffering in his life. Yeah. And I just kind of felt that from your eyes. Yeah. So already there's a little bit of empathy and compassion that I wouldn't have gotten had we just kept on talking.
There's like a deep connection that's unlocked.
Yeah. And we're like 6 feet apart.
Yeah, and we're like 6 feet apart. And yeah, I had a friend that told me once, like, about like, you know, if it's your girlfriend or your wife or whatever, like the power of like just sitting there and like just like looking at each other and staring in their eyes. It's almost like we're making eye contact right now, but we're talking. But then sometimes like the words are just like stripped from it.
Yeah, and you're thinking about what he's talking about.
Yeah, that it's just like a different level of like connection. But in the same vein about the eyes, what do you think it is? Just obviously you're a master storyteller, that like hearing a person's story softens your heart towards them?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a reason why they are the way they are, and usually it's probably a parental upbringing is a big part of it, the way they grew up, things that happened to them, could be tragedies, could just be difficulties of life. So, you know, when I'm talking with someone, yesterday I was talking with someone who is like a professional yo-yoer, and I'm like, oh, how'd you get into that? And he was like, well, I was severely bullied in high school, and I kind of use yo-yo as an outlet. And then I was like, oh, okay, this guy's been bullied. That makes sense. Like, that's kind of why he's like how he is now. And so, yeah, once you hear someone's story, it all just makes sense. You're just like, oh, I get it. That's why you are the way you are, and the way that's why you think the way you think.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the point that you were mentioning earlier, is that like we're not we're all the same in some regards. Like, yeah, there's like different experiences and things and maybe different responses we would have had to things, but there's just kind of these like through line through humanity of like common things that like drive us. And so like through your interviews and work, have you like been able to like identify like what those things are throughout all humans?
I think the unifying thing might be that we all have some sort of story of redemption that we're all undergoing, like something whereby we are like overcoming some sort of obstacle, some challenge that happened to us, whether self-inflicted or externally inflicted. But you dig deep enough, and like everyone's like battled through something. And so that's kind of what I enjoy really finding, especially if it's like especially if it's one that's kind of a major obstacle that they've had to go through, because I feel like that's just like, if there's such thing as a meaning or purpose to life, like I would say redemption's like really high up there. The hero's journey or whatever, it's kind of like what life's about. It's like you see that dragon and you go and conquer it, and the things you have to do to evolve and change yourself to conquer it. And then after you go through it, there's like this little almost like nugget of gold in your heart now that's like will never go away because you've gone through this thing. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm looking for those nuggets of gold in people. Sometimes they're still in it, but sometimes they finished it. And when I'm able to see that, I just get very like motivated and inspired. I'm just like, yeah, damn, this is it. Let's go, you know? And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, like, oh, this world is like crumbling. But but it feels very real, and it feels very meaningful, and it feels like, oh, this is why I'm here. This fight. So I think we're all fighting something.
Yeah, it really makes me think about, I feel like we're caught in like a duality or like a contradiction as humans of like, it makes me think of film, like what you just said, in the sense of like, let's just like, there's actually like an archetype that filmmakers build their scripts around, of like, there's
inciting incident.
Inciting incident. And then there's like probably like 75% into the film, there's like some sort of conflict or thing that just like everything falls apart.
Right.
And it's just like, it's key to storytelling in film. And it's like, on one level, we hate the pain and suffering. It's like, we don't want it. And it's like, let's just say it's like a romantic film, and it's like, it would have been nice if they were just like perfect for like their entire life and nothing ever like happened to them. But for some reason, like something is like so interesting or so compelling about someone who lost everything and then just like gained it all back. It's like, I don't know, it's like this arc that you're referencing, that I feel like, and that's the contradiction, is like, on one level we hate the pain, we hate the suffering, we don't want it to be that way. Well,
but that's someone else's suffering, that's not our own suffering.
If
I'm watching some guy, it doesn't hurt as much as if I'm going through it. But then there's the inspiration piece of what you were just talking about, where you're like, let's go, like because the overcoming of that just paints like a beautiful story that like inspires other people. We've had a couple different guests on this podcast about like talking about like chronic pain and other things like that, and it's like, it's just like thing that happens. It's like, if you're a parent to cancer, all of a sudden then you like all of a sudden are becoming like an advocate, because this happens so often. It's like you're becoming an advocate for cancer, or if like you're marginalized or bullied, then you resonate with those who are bullied. And I think the exploration of pain and how to frame that and how to relate to that is so key to kind of living well and kind of mastering the human experience to a level. And like going back to what unifies people, it's like, it's all these events that kind of shape them. Like, well, this is why they're doing what they're doing. This is why they're in this field. And I think learning that and seeing kind of, oh, this is kind of how the world works, and this is how it kind of flows. Things just kind of come together.
On the homepage of our website, I mean, we, Mighty Pursuit, we talk about like the pursuit of happiness. And so those themes of like acceptance and approval, there's some things that quote unquote we think that are gonna make us happy. Like we might not outwardly say that, but we behave as if it does. And so like there's wealth, there's fame, there's success, there's
security, safety, comfort,
pleasure, power, you know, even beauty, right? Like even someone's getting plastic surgery or something like that. A lot of the unifying things and themes are like, if I want to be famous or I want to be beautiful or successful, it's really about how other people are going to like perceive you, and the acceptance and approval that you'll see from that. And so
it feels really good.
Yeah, because it does feel good.
It feels really good when a video of mine is going viral. Like I'm kind of like on a high for like a couple of days.
Yeah.
But I know it doesn't last, and once it goes, it's like, all right, back to work.
Yeah. Do you feel like you ride that wave, or are you like intuitively like aware that it's a short-lived experience?
Yeah, it's there's this tension between like me wanting to enjoy this and like oh, another 1,000 views or something, and then also like there's a part of me that's being afraid of like, okay, I know this is gonna stop as well. So it's like this highs and lows kind of thing. I think because this happened multiple times now, it's a little less of a roller coaster, and I'm able to just be like, all right, let's move on.
Yeah, the roller coaster thing is interesting because it is a roller coaster, and so it's like not really like a stable thing. And so if you're basing your life off of the acceptance and approval of other people, like your life literally will feel like a roller coaster. It's like someone complimented you, now I'm on a high. Now they didn't, or I haven't gotten a compliment or the past 10 videos I produced sucked, like engagement wise. And now like, am I a failure as like a human being and stuff like that? And I feel like that emotional experience, a lot of people can resonate with that.
Yeah, that's part of the content creator's journey. It's like, but I think it's tricky because as a content creator, I can't completely just disregard people's approvals or critiques. I kind of have to listen to them because that's how I make more relevant or better content. I just have to be careful about how deep I let that critique or approval or accolade sink in and not let it kind of get to my head. Yeah,
I think one thing that I think is so special about what you're doing, you know, and this ties back to what we were talking about before, but like, I think subversive is probably the word that I would use most to describe what you're doing. And that word literally means to like seeking to subvert an established system. And so, you know, we talked about how like the tendency to judge another person has never been higher in our society, but like you've interviewed like literally all sorts of people. I mean, like there's like a dominatrix, there's like, you know, a garbage man, homeless, like rich, poor, old, young, like all these different people. And so naturally when you like encounter like so many different types of people, like you're going to run into people where like their worldview like is at odds or at pits with like your worldview or the way you see things. But you told me previously when we kind of prepared for this that like when you meet someone that you disagree with or doesn't think like you, it like kind of draws you in more. And so why do you feel that way?
I remember I had this interview with this woman who, and I never made this video, and I might try and go back and see if she's willing to let me release it. But she is in her late 20s, and in her early 20s, she was living in Texas and got pregnant. And because of Texas abortion laws, she had to have them. She ended up, this happened twice, and so she had two sons that she ended up giving both to the same foster family. And she enjoyed being pregnant. She enjoyed having this. She enjoyed like the whole motherhood aspect. She loves her sons, but she's still pro-choice. And I was just like, wait, but if you're pro-choice, wouldn't that mean like, had you had the choice, they wouldn't be here? And then you wouldn't have had these joys and pleasures and loves that you have now? She's grateful for the experience that she had, but she's still pro-choice. And I remember, you know, I have my own ongoing working thoughts with abortion and trying to understand and see where I stand. But that really kind of, I was just like, this is not connecting. This is not making sense. But after hearing her speak and hearing her thought process through it all and talking about how like she just shouldn't be forced to have this kid you know, what she would have preferred was like getting more help during the whole process and not being just isolated and abandoned, which is what she kind of felt like.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. For the first time, I understood the importance of a choice in a way that I didn't understand before. And so not always, but a lot of times when I meet someone with a different viewpoint, I may not like change sides, but like it helps me understand the topic in a fuller way. And that feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Just to be like more thoughtful about this specific thing.
Yeah. What do you feel like we lose as people, as humanity, like when we only hear like one side of the angle? Because this is such a hot topic today, like in terms of like censoring information or censoring viewpoints or stuff like that. Do you think that there's something that we lose if we don't get to hear the other side or their perspective?
I guess in a way, if we become more closed off, we kind of lose a part of ourselves too, or we lose out on a part to develop a more fuller version of ourselves. But it is difficult to say, have one viewpoint. For example, I believe in God and I'm talking to like an atheist and he's just like, it's hard to give him space to speak because it affects me so deeply. Yeah. But the more I can do that, the more I think it might even like make my own faith deeper. So I think it just prevents opportunities of deeper, fuller living. Because if you want to take the path of least resistance, it's to not listen, which is easy because you don't have to do anything. You just don't listen. Yeah. But then you kind of lose out. On some level, do you think that we're scared if we listen to the other person? Our belief system might just be completely upended. Like how much of a part of it, like with that guy in that example, like if I actually listen to this guy right now, like will I become an atheist? And then like, is that a scary thought, you know? Yeah. I mean, especially when the beliefs become so closely tied to our identity. Yeah. And value systems. That's definitely, like you don't want to fundamentally shake your worldview. Yeah. Especially the older you get. But at least when it comes to like God and faith and stuff, like if an atheist has a good argument, I really want to hear it. Like I kind of want to be tested because then I know if I really do believe what I believe in. Yeah, we had an episode with Dr. Jen Holden, who is one of the leading scientists in the field of like near-death studies. Yeah. So kind of people who have clinically died, been dead for minutes to hours, and then, you know, kind of floating outside their body. Like we're talking about all this crazy stuff that essentially proves that we have a solar afterlife. And what we're talking about like really made me think of a quote that was in one of the books that she was involved in, particularly for people that like have a kind of materialist worldview or maybe an atheistic worldview. She wrote, like, if they were to accept the evidence for the authenticity of near-death experiences, their hypothesis would be undermined and the foundation would be pulled out from under their life's work. It would mean that people have been on the wrong track their whole lives. And it was just like this idea of like the upending of like if you're a Muslim, right? And like your whole life, and then you're listening and you're hearing the perspective of a Christian or somebody else. And it's like convincing to you about like what they're saying. It's just like, how do I like make sense of like my entire life now that I've just been following this other thing? And it could go that way about abortion. It could go that way about sexuality. It could go that way about so many different things. And so it appears like there's obviously a cost, but on some level, like what you said, we kind of lose a part of ourselves that isn't truly that isn't truly being authentic, because we're not opening ourselves up to like the fullness of like, I don't know, the fullness of knowledge, the fullness of possibilities and stuff. And it's so much more powerful to choose your worldview over again when you had all these other possibilities, and then it just makes you go deeper. And it's like, even if you're married, right, it's like, it's so much more powerful to be like, I choose you over these 10 other whatever hot men or women. Like I actually choose you. And so, but then it's another thing to like never have those options, and then just kind of like the easy choice to make, like you were saying, of like, okay. Well, and once you have like children or you're in your 50s, 60s, like I can't imagine, like you basically would have to say, oh, to a certain extent, my entire life has been a lie. Yeah. And I don't know if that's possible. Yeah. But I think like, I think once we get to the other side, what you're describing as like lies we're believing that will be put away, and like the truth, like it's going to happen irregardless of whether, because we don't see the full picture. So I think whatever you're describing, we're going to get a rude awakening on the other side. And I don't know how it'll be, but I'm once the veil's unlifted, it'll be like, oh, snap.
Yeah. Well, I think on the practical end, in the meantime, like if people are just trying to like learn the skill of like having a conversation with people they disagree with or whatever, one of your recent videos was with an OnlyFans model, right? So from what I could tell, like you don't necessarily believe that porn is great for society, but you still carried out a respectful and constructive conversation. And she actually wrote in the comments, Eric was super lovely and respectful to me. We obviously have opposing views, but we can have a mature, open, and constructive conversation. So can you just give the audience any pointers, even like reflecting on that of how to have a mature, open, and constructive conversation?
How you approach a difficult conversation with two opposing views is you approach it with curiosity. Yeah. And as long as you're being curious, it's really hard to offend the other person. It's really hard to allow your judgments to come into play. Yeah. And when it's like, oh, but isn't it like this? Kind of like that versus like, but it's like this. You go like, it's like this. The other person's like, energy is just close out. But if you're like, I always thought that it was kind of like this. Like, what do you think? And like their guards are not up. They're and having received that from someone else before, it's a very pleasant experience for someone to be curious about you, especially if they kind of have like their own kind of judgments about the situation. And I'm very appreciative because I'm like, I get that you're kind of withholding what you really want to say to give me space to speak. Yeah. And that will make me speak my truth even more. Yeah. And then once I speak my truth, then we're actually getting to like actual conversational space that can actually change hearts. Because if our hearts are closed, we're not going to be able to change anyone's minds, right? So, and that's the whole point of, I guess, dialogue and conversation is to like, hey, I think you might be wrong. I want to change, whatever. That's kind of our underlying intent. So you can't do that if their hearts are closed. Yeah. And if your heart is closed, it's just going to be like this.
Yeah, you don't get anywhere.
Yeah. But so curiosity is just like, it allows you to dissociate yourself from your own views a little bit. It's an underrated superpower that I'm like trying to, maybe I'll write a book one day on curiosity, because I just feel like curiosity is such a interesting thing that no one talks about, but like it's such a natural kind of feeling. But anyways, digressing, curiosity.
Yeah, I feel like, man, that's so powerful. I think what interferes with curiosity is emotion. And so just a subtle plug to another recent episode with Dr. Ariana Brandolini about emotional regulation. I think, go back and watch that and how to process our emotions. But I think that is like the problem, like in essence, is like someone saying something and then I start getting upset. And so like in that instance, it could have been like she's saying that like this is not doing anything to society. And so if your deeply held belief is like, oh my God, this is so harmful to society. How
you don't know how many years I've struggled with this, like, and you're saying it's just whatever.
Yeah. And so like, what do you do when those like moments of emotion feel like they're welling up inside of you?
I mean, you notice them, right? It's a point of information. You're like, oh, this is something I'm charged about. Why am I charged about it? You get kind of curious about your own emotion, but it just boils down to like humility. You just have to be like, all right, I'm going to put that down. I think, yes, it's emotion, but I think a lot of it's pride. Yeah. Like, I have to be right. I have to get my point across. I have to feel seen. And if you can just let that go for a split second, maybe you will get those things, but after the fact. Yeah. But yeah, if you just start from there, it's not going to be super productive.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just her, but I noticed like on a few other interviews, like people in the comments that were being interviewed, like talked about how they felt like honored and respected by you. And so like why do you feel like people say that? Like, what is it that you're doing that makes them feel that way?
What it kind of feels like is I'm just holding a mirror up to people. Yeah. I'm just like, here, go ahead, just talk. And then they're just I'm just reflecting what they're saying back to them.
Yeah.
Why? What's that like? Why did you do this?
Really
How did you do this? And so it's almost like I almost kind of disappear, and it's just like we're kind of going into their insides together. And yeah, no one does that. I wish I could do that for myself, to be honest. But and it's not even like a therapist. It's kind of like a therapist, but it's more like a therapist plus like a storyteller kind of thing. A therapist might try to have his own ways or whatever, but yeah, it's rare that someone gets the opportunity to share their thoughts to a person and their feelings in a way where they don't receive judgment. And that's part of the charm of talking to strangers, because they can't judge you. They don't know you. When I hear someone say, I really hated going to school, I take that at like face value. I don't know that, oh, they slacked off, oh, they whatever, I don't know this. I hear you and I'm like, oh, okay, no judgment, tell me more. And I think that's what disarms a lot of people to talk, because they know they're not being judged, because I try not to judge them, but two, I don't know anything about them. But when you talk to a friend, they know your history. They know what's going on. But there's obviously, like, you talk to a friend, there's a deeper sort of mutual understanding there. But it is nice to talk to a stranger, and sometimes you're able to feel seen in a way that people can't see you.
I think what you're talking about is a little bit of like a life hack in a sense. There's this kind of curriculum or program called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and they talked about, they call it incarnational listening, which is like literally what you're talking about, the exact same thing, of like just someone saying something and then you repeating it back to them. And like how powerful that is, of like you not making any commentary or whatever, but like you're literally, it's like almost like, okay, I see you. I understand. You're saying this, right? Yeah. And there's just something so disarming about that and connecting,
I mean, it's kind of what Jesus did, right? He asked a lot of questions when he could have gave answers. It's like, why do you call me a good teacher? Why do you think this is a sinner? Or why are you doing that? Or so it's when you ask a question to somebody, it just
I'll never forget, I was on a road trip around the country and at a gas station, and this guy, like, this was in like, I don't know, random gas station in New Mexico, and this guy like came up to me and he was like belligerent and he was like really upset, and like but he wasn't like being angry towards me about whatever, and so I engaged the conversation, and he was asking like for food and stuff like that, and so then I went in and I bought him food, and I just sat down and had a conversation with him. And he just poured out his life over the course of like the next like 30 minutes, and then he like told me that he had like murdered someone in the past, and he was in jail and like all this stuff. And there was just something like so connecting about the experience of like, I didn't run away with him. Like, he had a lot of shame of the fact that he was in jail and he had murdered someone, and I think it was like a gang related thing, but just like sitting there with him and like just weeping, and like he was talking about how he was like praying or something, and like he like wanted like God to like send him like a person or something like that, and then this like literally had happened like 10 minutes later, of like I'm sitting there engaging in this conversation for like 30 minutes of like with this guy. And I think sometimes we hear things out of people and it's like, oh, I murdered someone. And so like if you're in something that's dangerous, of like, obviously like maybe you need to get away from that situation, but like depending on what the person's telling you, like and what they're sharing about their life, I think that there's like something so powerful in responding with questions or responding with like non-judgment about whatever people are talking about with their life. And
because going back to what we were saying earlier, like everyone has a story. Like that guy probably, whatever, parents abusive, probably had some incident, and so it's like whatever, murder is murder, but like once you kind of get into everyone's stories, I don't know if he told you a little bit about his upbringing.
He did. It was just a complete disaster.
And you're just like, oh, okay. If I were in your shoes, I might have done the same thing. I probably would have done the same thing. I
might be wrong, but like, have there been people who've told you that they murdered someone? No? And what was that encounter or encounters?
Yeah, I met these two vagabonds, homeless guys, Phil and Blue. Phil was this Caucasian man I met on the street. He ran away from home after his mother died. It was kind of like finding himself, and then he introduced me to his buddy Blue a week later. And Blue grew up in New Orleans, in the projects of New Orleans. Was dealing drugs. One day he got his stuff stolen, and he retaliated by shooting and killing the guy who stole his drugs. And then he went to jail. He went to jail when he was like 17, and he came out when he was 32. Yeah. So he basically lost the best years of his life. And then right after he got out of prison, he was just traveling around the country. And I met him about 13 years from that point. Mm-hmm. And so he told me, similar to probably to your story, within a minute or two of meeting him, that he had killed someone. Mm-hmm. And
did you freak out or no?
No. I mean, the content creator in me was like, oh snap, let's, because I've never talked to someone who's murdered someone. Yeah. But it was very jarring because I have my own judgments and assumptions about murder, and how horrible it is. And so like on one hand, I'm like talking to this very friendly dude. I'm like, how could you have murdered someone? Like, what are you doing? Yeah. And then there's another part of me that just like feels so bad for him because he's lost his life, and now he's like he was struggling with guilt over the thing, trying to seek forgiveness from God. Yeah. So it just gets back to like, this is what life is. It's a lot of gray area, and it's a lot of people making mistakes. There's a lot of redemption stories. There's a lot of people trying to figure stuff out. And this is what feels real, not like some of the other stuff we can partake in. And when I am able to touch some of that realness, like I'm sure how you felt after talking with the guy at the gas station, you're just like, it just narrows your scope, and you're just like, okay, God, this is what God's working on. Yeah. This is the stuff that God's concerned about. Yeah. Like, how can I be part of this? Because I think this is the kind of stuff that will last into eternity.
Some people who are familiar with your work might not have necessarily realized that you believe in God, or that's a big part of your journey. But I think it's really interesting that it is. And so like, how has your work been like impacted by your spiritual journey?
Part of why I think I feel for people more now is because just of my relationship with God, and the ways that, like, the journey that I've been on with him, and the ways, the more I see him working in me, the more I see him working in others, the more I'm able to just like see things I didn't see before. I think it makes me value people a little bit more, especially folks that I don't really want to value, or like just maybe don't get along with, or I'm not interested by or something. I just kind of remind myself again that God is working in this person just as much as me.
I mean, generally, how do you feel like God sees people?
I get the sense of like, what is that Michelangelo like painting where there's like two fingers like trying to touch? Like he's just trying to touch us, and he sees our plights. He sees the ways we're struggling, whether it's our own thing or it's something else, and he's heartbroken. Yeah, because if I hear this person's story and I'm heartbroken, I can't imagine how God's feeling. There's a guy I was talking with. He was in his 40s. He had like tattoos all over his face, and talking about how he was in a lot of fights and addicted to drugs, whatever. Now he's trying to sober up and clean up, and he was talking about how he like prays to God, and I was like, oh, so like, what do you think God thinks about you? And he's like, I think God's probably disappointed in me. And I was just like, oh, okay, why do you think that? Like he's like, oh, just because of the things I've done and the mistakes, and kept on taking left turns. And I was just like, oh, but isn't God like wouldn't God have known that you're going to be taking those left turns all the way? Like in a sense that he's not surprised by your moves because he kind of knows. So it's hard to be disappointed if you kind of already kind of know what's going to happen. Yeah. And then he was like, yeah, I think I'm just disappointed in myself. I think God gives, his mercies are new every morning. I remember when I was a bit of a rebel in my ways, and I was like feeling very bad about myself, but I never once got the feeling that God was condemning me. I never once got the feeling that he was like mad or angry about me, because he probably knew why I was doing it better than I knew. Only once did I get like a sense of like, he was like, stop, don't do that. But like, other than that, he was always just there. God's just there. He's just He's just watching,
Yeah.
but he's ready.
Yeah.
He's ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, to people watching who might not believe in God or completely had walked away from it at one point, I think your work, and to a sense, like people knowing that like that's a driving force behind your work could be a breath of fresh air, because a lot of people might have walked away from this thing because of the exact opposite thing than what you're talking about. You're like, you felt like you weren't condemned. In you know, as you're moving through different behaviors, and even that guy talking about being disappointed.
Yeah.
It's like people have interacted with like followers of Jesus in the past, and they've been like really turned off by the experience. And then especially so if there's been like shame, like shaming of like whatever they were doing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so where do you feel like people go wrong, like in terms of like kind of representing God or expressing their beliefs or all this stuff?
I think we become like Pharisees. Like, we're the people that Jesus was hating on the most in the New Testament, right?
And who are the Pharisees?
Woe to you, the Pharisees, the people who are like, this is a law and you should follow it, and you got to do this and this and that.
So like religious people. Yeah.
Religious people who were constantly applying pressures on the other people, right? And Jesus, they were like number one people in the Sadducees and the scribes or whatever, but like they were the number one people in Jesus' crosshairs. He was always just like, hey, make sure you got your stuff in order first. Yeah. Preach the gospel, be a light, live in a way that is like contrary to other people. But he was never like, hey, you should like go shame people and condemn people. You know, and so I think that tendency in us is just like, it's our own pride. It's our own insecurities.
You know, we had posted something recently from Billie Eilish talking about, you know, one of her recent albums, and like how like people in the comment, particularly Christians in the comment section, were calling her Satan and stuff like that. And it's just like, I don't know, part of it's just like going totally wrong. Like, it's one thing if you see people behaving dysfunctionally, you know, just the average Christian, whatever, like it could be a turn off, right? But it's like, it has a particular stink to it when it's like, oh, I follow God, and it's like, oh, love God, love people, and like in their bio, like, and then then they're writing these like mean comments online, and yeah, I just feel
it's a little bit of a power move too.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, hey, I know God, and I know what's right.
A lot of people, like obviously, particularly someone who might not believe in God or doesn't identify as follow Jesus, whatever, will then like go down a route of like, this is exactly the reason why people like should keep their beliefs to themselves, is this type of behavior that you see on social media. And so it's like all the good apples and the bad apples get like lumped into like the same category, and it's just like, okay, let's like not talk about this. And do you feel like that is like a problem in itself, of like just saying that people should keep their beliefs to themselves?
I think you shouldn't share your belief in a way that's condemning the other person. That's for sure. Yeah. But again, maybe if you approach with curiosity, like, hey, Billy, I thought this, or why this, instead of, hey, Billy, Satan or something. I don't know. So I think maybe it's still okay, but just the delivery of it.
Yeah, I think in part it's almost like the most natural thing for people to do is to share whatever they believe in. And so like this transcends spirituality. It's like every little aspect of life. Like if you see a fitness guru online, they're kind of quote unquote preaching to you about whatever they're doing or whatever changed their life. Yeah. And so there's so many different versions, even the OnlyFans model, right? So if she's doing an interview with you or on a podcast or something and be like, oh, I'm making so much money right now. Like, this is amazing, and I get to travel the world, and I get to pay for my mom's stuff, and whatever. It is like a form of convert. And so it's like, to actually deny that in the human spirit of like, I'm excited about this thing, it's doing something in me, or I feel like it's affecting my life in some sort of powerful way, and then be like, don't talk about that at all, is like completely unnatural.
Right. It's like, if you know of a new restaurant that's really good, you tell all your friends, because you want them to like enjoy themselves with it, and also to like you more, because you just, you know, recommended a good thing. But there's probably some evolutionary basis whereby we want to share what's good with other people.
I think my thing is like, you just want to have a fair chance in the public square, in the sense of like, is this belief being articulated authentically? And so like when you see like bad apples like kind of poisoning the soil, to so to speak, of like, oh, like this is what following Jesus or whatever means.
Yeah.
Like it
and
can
it's like
be
a troubled 15-year-old
yeah.
in the middle of Montana.
And so it's like
ah.
I think that there's a power in like awareness of like, okay, what does this thing actually stand for? And whether or not you agree with me or believe in that, at least there's power in at least you understanding like what it stands for. And so I think that like raising awareness around that, I think would do really good, especially in the area of like religion and spirituality. Your work is a testament to that. Like it's like it's in like an art project in a sense, but it's an expression and it's an extension of like the beliefs that you have, and like how that's like a motivating factor. And I think that even like you doing what you're doing, and then people seeing behind that about like, oh, what does this guy believe? I think that's like a positive force like out into the world. So
at the end of the day, I try to just make like faith and God not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, do you believe in God? No? Great. Yes. Cool. I think just the word God itself has a weight to it now these days because of the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I just try to make a matter of fact. Like I'm just like, this is not that big of a deal. God's gonna be God whether or not we're talking about him. You know, if I'm praying for someone in the middle of an interview, like whatever, it's all good. Like I'm just sharing my thoughts on this person.
It's like the normalization of it.
Yeah. It's just like, you know, for whatever reason, and I think it's partly because I didn't grow up in the church. It's always just been normal to me to talk about these things. Yeah. And it just doesn't feel like such a big deal. I understand the condemnation and the criticism and aspects of it, but at the end of the day, we're just talking about why we're here, what we're meant to do, and what happens after we die. Like these are things that we think about all the time. Yeah. So it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are big questions, obviously. And I think, you know, kind of where I wanted to land, obviously, like when a lot of people are wrestling with like why we're here, like meaning, like purpose, like these big questions in life. And you said off the top, obviously, that like you didn't necessarily feel fulfillment in kind of the finance world, like in terms of like it being a passion. And so like, obviously we live in New York City, everyone's hustling here. And a lot of people, if you hear their stories, it's like they feel like they're drowning in their day job. So they're not doing what they're passionate about. And they're like, they might see someone like you and they're like, wow, I would love to be doing what Eric's doing right now. Or I'd love to be like following my passion. I know your story, obviously, like you weren't doing this full time at one point and now you are. And so like, do you have any advice for people in terms of like pursuing their meaning, purpose, dreams, like anything in that area of like how to go about doing that?
Yeah, I think you just really want to get back in touch with yourself, whatever that means to you. Yeah. But like, you just need to come to a point where you can call your inner wisdom, your inner spirit, your inner voice, just whatever part that hasn't really been influenced by the pressures of the world, the voices of your parents, the expectations of your peers, like whatever it is, like that's kind of influencing that inner voice. So how do you do that? Like, you know, for me, it was coming back to God because that's a point of reference outside of me. Yeah. You know, you take retreats, you go travel, you go to nature, that kind of stuff. So you get to that kind of point and you just kind of quiet yourself and you're like, all right, what would I do if I had no fear? What would I do if I wasn't afraid to fail, that kind of stuff? Yeah. A place of freedom. And then you just see what comes out. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just like knitting or jogging. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, you just want to make sure you're in a good place first. Like your heart is good, your mind is good, your body, your health is good. And then from there you can kind of, I think, pursue something in a way that's not seeking validation as much, not trying to chase money and pleasure and whatever that. And once you're able to do something just for the sake of doing it and not for the results, that's kind of how I fell into this. And where you might be able to discover a calling or a purpose that's more in line with how you might have been created. Yeah.
I think some people feel stuck. It's like, you know, I would absolutely like kind of echo what you're saying about like getting in touch Like, I think that's really important. But then the after effect of like getting in touch is like, do you feel like there's a like a reckless way to pursue your dreams, in the sense of like, some people feel like there isn't a pathway to doing what they want to do. And so it's like, well, I spend 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week in this job. And it's like, then I come home. And so like, what would you say about the idea of people just going all in versus like doing it in a way that there's like wisdom or like, some sort of cushion or like sustainability, like in what they're doing?
Like for me, I look at my path and doors just always opened at the right time. I was always constantly thinking about, when do I quit my job? When do I, but it was more kind of just like, hey, be faithful, do what you're supposed to be doing with what you're given right now. And just trust that like when the time is right, like he will like guide you to do the things you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it's something that you just drop and go.
Yeah.
But it can be. But I think, at least for me, it was like doors open and then it was like a nice flow of things. Yeah.
What about, do you feel like your meaning and purpose has to be tied up into your work, or could it be like something else? Like what if you like, and initially like you were doing this on the side, obviously. And so like you were working, but then you were doing this on the side. And so like, I think a lot of people feel a lot of pressure to like, I need my purpose and my passion to come out of this 9 hours a day in the middle of the day. And so like, do you think there's any wisdom or that we give people in that area?
I think anyone who's able to do their purpose and their passion as their 9 to 5, say like artists, for example, is a very blessed and lucky life that we're all kind of aiming for. Yeah. In a perfect world one day, maybe we all do. Until then, there's this concept called ikigai in the Japanese culture. And in the West, we've kind of taken it to mean like combine your purpose, combine what you're good at, what people need, and what you're paid for. And so it's kind of this kind of purposeful kind of ikigai. But actually, ikigai is just about finding like joy and fulfillment in everyday things. Yeah. So when I was plugging away in Excel sheets and I'm trying to create VLOOKUP formulas, like what is going on here? But I learned to equate even what like little P&L cell I was creating. I found fulfillment in like the normal things, or not normal things, but just in the more maybe less artistic, less passionate things. So it's possible. And I think you have to be practical. Like not everyone can do a 9 to 5 thing, or not everyone can live an artist's life. So if you can try your best to find joy and fulfillment and purpose in even the most banal things, I think that's the way we're supposed to live. At the end of the day, I would love for people to hear this, watch this video, watch my content, and take away from it a greater desire to want to open up and live. Yeah. And step out of their comfort zones, because I know those things are hard, but and be curious when it's hard, and listen to opposing viewpoints, listen to other people's stories, and just keep their eyes open as best they could, as best they can, even with the veils that we do have on. I just hope that some of the ways in which God has given me a light, it can bring some light to other people.
It's really beautiful. Thank you for being with us today, Eric.
You want to do another eye staring contest for like?
No.
Okay.